Okay. Good evening, and thank you for joining what is expected again to be an informative evening for us voters. I'm Bob Binney, first Vice Chair of the Boston Ward 5 Democratic Committee. And it is a pleasure for me to introduce the extraordinary, inspiring, and impressive Danielle Allen as our moderator for tonight's forum. Danielle is a professor for public policy, politics, and ethics at the Harvard University, director of the Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Ethics, and the James Bryan Conant University professor, one of Harvard's highest honors. She is also a seasoned nonprofit leader, Democratic advocate, national voice on pandemic responses, distinguished author, and a mom. I have included more of Danielle's bio details in the chat for anyone that might want to look. And with that, good evening, Danielle, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I want to thank both ward committees and Progressive Mass for pulling together this incredibly important candidates forum. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to say something about why it's so important that we have this forum for the DA candidates and the sheriff candidates. And then also share a minute with you about our format, which is a little unusual as we've sought to accommodate schedules and make everything work for everybody. But first, let me just lift you all up for being here and thank you everybody for watching on live stream. The world is just full of turbulence and chaos and pain and anger and frustration and disappointment right now. So the fact that you're making time to be here tonight to think about the future of Suffolk County and what is necessary for the DA's office and sheriff is just so important. Such a contribution to the well-being of your community and of all our communities. I care a lot about these issues, and I've been for quite some time a supporter of the ACLU in particular, and the work it's done to encourage people to really think about DA races and sheriff races. You've probably seen their campaigns. So what does a DA do? What's a DA? And the Know Your Sheriff campaign. These are fundamental. In my own life experience, I lost, as many of you know, a beloved cousin, my baby cousin, Michael. In 2009, I lost him to a combination of mass incarceration and gun violence. He'd gone to prison when he was 15 on a first arrest in 1995 for an attempted carjacking. And he served 12 years, roughly speaking. He got a sentence of 12 years and 8 months and served most of that, and then had 2 years out at the point that he was shot and killed by somebody he'd met while he was in prison. There are all kinds of things that went wrong in those early days when he was first arrested and then tried and the like, and then all kinds of things that didn't work as he made the effort at reentry and the passage back into life in community. So I have spent the years since then trying to find ways to drive change. And I know so many of you who also are here in this conversation have been doing the same. The fact that this work is fundamental is abidingly and abundantly clear. 1 out of every 2 Americans is related to somebody who has spent time behind bars. Just sit with that for a minute. 1 out of every 2 Americans. Yet we don't hear that many stories. We're not always just sort of awash in the stories of what people have experienced in our criminal legal system. That is because there is a rock of shame, a rock of stigma that sits on those who are connected to the criminal legal system. And we have to lift that rock so we can hear those stories in order to drive change. We also have to hold the people responsible who are really at the center of organizing and operating that criminal legal system. And again, those are our district attorneys and our sheriffs. It's an astonishing thing to think, again, that 1 out of every 2 Americans is related to somebody who has spent time behind bars. And when you really register that fact, it really shows you that these offices are truly among the most important in our society. They are touching half of our population directly, affecting life, fates, and fortunes. And I don't have to tell this audience as well, of course, that the course of the war on drugs and the impact of racial disparities have left us with devastation in communities, especially communities of color and low-income communities. All of this is also entangled with the opioid epidemic and the real challenges of substance use disorder. We have, in other words, very serious work to do. These offices have a sacred trust, and paying close attention to them, really understanding the stakes and consequences, is of utmost human importance and of importance for all of our communities. So again, I'm so grateful to all of you for being here tonight. In terms of our format, we're going to spend first time with the district attorney candidates. We'll have 15 minutes for conversation with one candidate, and then 30 minutes of debate around policy issues, and then a final 15 minutes with the other candidate for the similar, more personal conversation. So bookending the debate with a more personal conversation. And then at that point, we'll switch to the conversation with our sheriff candidate who's joining us this evening. And that will be a 30-minute interview format. So we're being a bit experimental with the format this evening. And I appreciate everybody's willingness to try this out with all of us. So with that, I know that we're slightly, not quite at 6:45, but Sharon, you tell me whether you'd like us to go ahead and start, and then we'll have a 5-minute break between the two sessions, or what is the best?
Let me check. I think one of our candidates is missing right now. Let me see. Oh, I see he's here. So let me add. Kevin is here, so I think we can get started.
Terrific. Fantastic.
Hi. How are you?
Welcome, DA Hayden. Thank you very much for being here. Now, I think you know the format this evening. It looks like you're on the move there, but hope we've got you stationary for a spell here.
I'm on the move, but I'm not driving.
All right, there you go. Glad to hear it. So we've got 15 minutes for a bit more of a free-flowing conversation, and then we will transition to 30 minutes of issue-related debate between you and Councillor Arroyo, and then I'll have another 15 minutes with Councillor Arroyo at the conclusion. All righty? So, so we'll go ahead and jump in. I am going to assume that folks have already tracked your bio. And so I'm not going to go ahead and ask basic biographical questions this evening. I'd like to really start with the role you hold and seek to hold at this point through election, post-appointment by Governor Baker. And I'd like you to have in mind my 12-year-old and 10-year-old. I've got 2 kids. And I'd really like your picture of how I should explain to them what the most important function of the DA's office are.
Sure. So that's a question that hits close to home to me. But before I go any further, I'll say I apologize because I am on the road in between a number of different events, and could be in tunnels, so that the picture could change a bit. But from a personal standpoint, I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old boy. They live in Boston, and they make me proud every day. But my best way of explaining sort of the DA's office and our role is really threefold. One is public safety, keeping our community safe, making sure that the rights of the victims in our community are protected and that people feel safe in their communities. 2 is making sure that our criminal legal system continues to operate and expand and improve in ways that make it fair and just for all. So I explain that to my kids sort of that way. I quite frankly, I think when I talk to them, like from a reform perspective, that's not necessarily something they understand, but understanding that we want a system that works for everybody and is fair and just, that is certainly something that they understand. And then I think that the third fold component of that is always striving to work in ways that allow our community to continually reconcile and heal from trauma, from harm. Our legal system is such that when bad crime happens, particularly violent crime, it can really tear at the fabric of communities and cause harm. And we want to constantly be restoring and healing our communities in that way. And I think that the district attorney's office plays a vital role in all three of those areas.
All right, now thank you for that. Let me go ahead and actually pick up on one piece of that just to make sure I'm understanding. I think you said, one job is safety, safety for all. Another job, I think you said, was improving and expanding the criminal legal system. And then a third point about healing and reconciliation. I want to come back to the second point. I'm not sure what you mean by expanding the criminal legal system. Can you explain?
Yeah, I don't know if expanding is probably not the right word, but I mean making our system better and more just and more fair for everybody. I mean, like very simply put, and I've got two young Black boys. I know that our Black and Brown communities are constantly and rightfully concerned about fairness and equity in our system. That's important to us. As a Black man, it's vitally important to me, particularly with two young Black boys, teenage boys that are living in Boston. We want our system to be fair and just for all. And that takes continued efforts, continued improvement, continued ways of looking at our system differently, looking at restorative justice practices, looking at ways that we don't prosecute low-level offenses, looking at ways that we reduce our incarceration rates and the extent to which people are incarcerated. Those are all very important things.
Okay, thank you, DA. I'm going to come back to this last point about restoration for a moment, and healing and reconciliation. We'll talk more about low-level offenses and things like that when we get to the policy and the issues discussion. But can you,
Sure.
so I'm talking to my kids, my 12-year-old, my 10-year-old, and they're saying to me, okay, well, how will I know if this DA is successful, Mom? What should I be looking at to know if we've actually made progress on healing and restoration? What key indicators or information should my kids be tracking?
Well, I think some of the key indicators are going to be, things like, quite frankly, our rates of incarceration. I think an important impact that we can have there is something that I believe in strongly and built my entire career on as a prosecutor when I was younger, is returning citizens. And people, if they unfortunately do have to spend a period of incarceration, how do they come back into our communities and back out of the sentence they served, whatever that may be, in a way that's holistic, in a way that gives them opportunity and access. I think that that's something that Massachusetts at times has done very well. I apologize, it's very dark right now. I think it's also something that we can currently improve on. And the reason I mentioned that as a specific example is because I believe that returning citizens and their reentry to access and opportunities that will hopefully prevent them from ever going back into being incarcerated is the greatest form of restorative justice that could ever be had or experienced. When someone is restored and given access and opportunity, particularly in Boston, you talk about 6 degrees of separation in this world. In Boston, our degrees of separation are more like 1.5. And so when people come out and do well and have access and opportunities to careers and to options that can better and improve them and hopefully prevent them from reoffending, everyone in our community sees that. Everyone knows it. And then they get an opportunity to give back and make a difference. And so that's just one example of restorative justice that I think is really important.
Okay, I appreciate that. So my kids, I'm going to tell them they've got to track incarceration rates. They got to track recidivism rates. They've got to track access to job opportunities and access to, say, the stories folks are able to tell about the way they've had a chance to give back. Now, those are good goals. Those are things that we all want, that we're all excited about. And yet, we've talked about these things for many a day, many a year. So I'd really like to understand your theory of change. when you think about the levers that you as DA can pull to make those things happen, what would be the 3 most important levers that you think of yourself as responsible for pulling to transform the dynamic that we have been watching?
Yeah, sure. And just to backtrack for a second, I don't know if kids understand necessarily tracking all that data and statistics, but I do think they understand seeing the difference in a community where people do better. And I think that they notice that as much as anybody, whether it's in their own lives or their friends, or their uncles or whoever it may be. That is one key lever right there. The other, another.
Sorry, I didn't follow that. What's the lever? I just didn't follow you.
The key lever of focusing on returning citizens and focusing on that, the importance of access and opportunity for them in order to prevent them from reoffending.
Okay. So I'm sorry, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna ask you one more question there so that I understand completely. So when you talk about focusing on that access to opportunity, again, like what counts as focus? Like what do you have to do to achieve that improved opportunity?
So there's a bunch of things that you have to do. First of all, it takes a lot of hard work and collaboration with the sheriff's office and with other partners that are willing to engage. We have trades and unions and the like that are really interested in this because they know how valuable it is. They know what a win-win it is when they're able to bring people into the workforce that are from the community, that reflect the diversity of the community, that are from the community. And so you have to work with those partners. You have to work with private funders that are going to provide, quite frankly, the resources that are needed to drive educating people while they're being incarcerated, and also to provide the access when they come out in conjunction with trades and unions. So it's a collaboration, the partnership. It's also working with all of your community partners. It's part of it is, anecdotally, I can tell you, I did a neighborhood walk several weeks ago, and there was a transition home. And the conversation that we had as we were doing this neighborhood walk was how 3 years ago, the transition home really struggled because the community it was new to them. They didn't understand it, and the community was not accepting of the people that were living in this transition home coming back into the community. And it took working with the transition home and with those people in the community and with the related partners to really wrap around not just the community, but also the people that were in that transition home so that they could be successful, so that people could understand that this was a good thing, that it could work. And on this community walk, people testified to the fact that where there was a lot of fear and apprehension about this transition home 3 years ago, now they embrace it. These people come out, they're part of the community, they're welcomed. They understand that there's struggles, particularly if there's issues with use disorders and those sorts of trip ups and slips that can happen to people in that scenario. But the community embraces and supports a transition home that, frankly, 3 years ago, they really struggled with. That's the power of community collaboration.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I'm going to shift gears here just because we're going to be out of time soon. So I don't want to miss a couple other key things. So as you know, in your office, you manage a budget, I think, of roughly $24 million or so and 300 people. So leadership internally and externally is fundamental to success in the role. Can you share an example of a key leadership lesson that you've learned along the course of your career that will guide you or guides you in seeking to lead this organization well? A key leadership lesson that you've learned in practical experience along the course of your career?
Sure. I mean, at the outset, as I sort of answer that question, I think that having led a state agency before, the Sex Offender Registry Board, one thing that I knew then and I know now in the DA's office, we do have a large budget. It's never enough. People think that we have a tremendous amount of resources and more money at our disposal than we need and that sort of thing. That's simply not true. Our attorneys are making starting at $62,500 a year as an attorney. Our victim witness advocates and other support staff are making even less. But the key lesson is to always be mindful of making sure that your resources are focused first and foremost on the people industry, if you will. The people drive our job. People drive our success. People drive everything that we do. And the resources always need to be strategically used and placed in ways that maximize your people power.
So thank you for that. Can you say something then about the, what are, when you think about the people at the DA's office, what are the top qualities that you value as leader in your organization that you celebrate and try to bring out to activate that people power?
Sure. We want people with exceptionally high caliber of honesty and integrity. And that's vitally important for anyone that's involved in the legal profession, to operate in a manner that understands how fairness and justice is absolutely vital to everything that we do. It is our job to represent the best interest of the community, not the best interest necessarily of a particular case or the best interest of a particular situation or crime, and that is always vitally important. And hard work is also vitally important. And we also want people that understand truly what it means to be team players and to be servant leaders. So everyone in our office, if you're in the district attorney's office and you're serving in a role in our office, people look to you as a leader. And we want servant leaders. We want leaders who understand that they're there to serve their communities. Servant leadership is vitally important. That's how I view myself as a servant leader. And so I try to call people to the same task.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So let me just conclude this session with one fun question for you. So what's one of your family's favorite places in Boston to celebrate a birthday or other special family event?
Sure. Well, so I live in Rosendale. Pleasant Cafe, that is not far from us at all. It's walking distance. That is a place that we love to go to and that we go to pretty regularly. It's always good to have fun occasions there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, DA. And now we're going to invite Councillor Arroyo to join you, and we will transition to some issues conversation. So let's see, Sharon, are we ready for the councillor?
Yes, he's here. 1 second.
Okay, great. Terrific. Welcome, Councillor. Thank you very much for joining us as well. Now, just to refresh both of your sense of the format, I'm going to be asking you both the same questions, maybe slightly tweaking for your context. You're in two different roles currently. And then you'll have a minute to respond. So we will use a timer for this portion. I will in all likelihood also follow up, and then you'll get another minute to answer the sort of part two of the question. So we'll go one person first and then the other person. And then once you've both gone, you'll each have an opportunity to respond to something the other said if you so choose, and you'll get 30 seconds for those responses. Okay, that makes sense. Great. So I'd love to start by talking about mass and CAS. This continues to be a challenge for everybody in Boston and for the Commonwealth more broadly. And so DA Hayden, I'd like to start with you on this one and to make sure we all understand the recent policy you've introduced. And my question about this policy is, as I understand it, you have taken about $400,000 from the asset seizures program and redirected it to support, I think, what you call services over sentences, a form of diversion. If I understand correctly, the diversion program that you're supporting or expanding here for mass and CAS is focused on post-arraignment diversion as a part of a criminal proceeding. I'd like to ask if that's the correct understanding, and then if so, why use this approach to diversion as opposed to pre-arraignment diversion?
Sure. So it is services over sentences is for both. It's for both pre-arraignment and post-arraignment diversion. I know that we cannot arrest and criminalize ourselves out of the opioid epidemic, and that simply is not the solution. And the services over sentences program that we've expanded is really designed to address all of those circumstances, and to address those that are of most highest risk and highest need. So there are people that will be arraigned on a case that still need treatment and still need addiction treatment and addiction services.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and ask my follow-up question there then. So can you say more about how you're distinguishing between cases that are post-arraignment diversion opportunities and cases where diversion is a pre-arraignment opportunity? What distinction are you using to decide that?
That's a case-by-case determination of whether or not a case needs to be arraigned or not arraigned. So if someone needs services and treatment and their case doesn't need to be arraigned, then we won't arraign them and we can provide them with the services and treatment. But we don't want to not provide services and treatment to someone just because their case has risen to the level where they're being arraigned. And that has nothing to do with addiction or the mental health issue per se. That may have to do with the nature of the offense, whether or not crimes and violence involved, that sort of thing, length of criminal record. But it's never about criminalizing the addiction. It's designed to give that option and that alternative for treatment for everyone that comes into our system as a touch point.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Councillor Arroyo, I'd like to turn to you on mass and cast then and to ask you to articulate what would be your approach to diversion, the sort of use of treatment services and the like in responding to the situation at Mass and Cass.
Thank you, Professor Allen, and everybody who's here. So I was a public defender before I became a city councilor. I think I'm the only candidate here who has actually represented an individual who resided on Mass and Cass within my time as a Roxbury defender. And so what I know is coercive rehabilitation does not work. It's actually been proven to statistically not work. It's harmful in many different ways. It sometimes actually accentuates or makes the problem worse. And so what my administration would do is not criminalize addiction, period. That means pre-arraignment release. I understand where there are crimes of violence, where there are crimes of trafficking or of drugs in that area or things of that nature. We will certainly prosecute that. But when we are talking about people who are suffering from addiction, what is essentially happening when you criminalize that is you are creating all of these sort of spiraling butterfly effect impacts on not just the community that is being incarcerated, but the community that is not incarcerated. And I'll just give you a little bit of what I mean by that. Often when I was a public defender in Essex County, where they created a program similar to what District Attorney Hayden has put in place here.
Okay, so now let me go ahead and ask a follow-up question, the same follow-up question for you. Yes, you after a minute, sorry, it goes to mute. So it happened to the DA as well. So you're both gonna get that. I'm asking you meaty questions, so it is a little hard to get into 1 minute. I want to acknowledge. So then same question for you. You just said you would go ahead and prosecute violent offenses and so forth at Mass and Cass, but not substance use disorder in itself. Can you say more about the distinction you're drawing there? I didn't completely follow. Again, for you, what's in the pre-arraignment category? What does get arraigned, and how does that affect the relationship to the diversion component?
Absolutely. So in practice, often when somebody is suffering from substance use disorder, they are brought before the court either for a possession of illegal drugs charge or some other sort of nuisance crime like trespassing or something of that like. And so those kinds of cases are or shoplifting or something of that nature. And so those kinds of cases are sort of in the framework and fabric of people who are dealing with poverty, dealing with substance use disorder. When we criminalize that process, when we essentially say, do you want to go to jail or rehab? And we'll put you on this probation and we'll put you in these processes where we hold you in incarceration. What ends up happening is a yo-yo effect on that individual. They are constantly yanked out of programming and housing and all of the different ways in which you can help an individual outside of a court setting and put into a prison for whatever probation violation may occur if they miss a court date of some nature for a drug screen. But what actually happens is you create all these PTSD factors and all of these sort of issues where when they miss something, when there's where there was a relapse or something of that nature, they often will go off the grid. They will not come to the services. They will not continue to go to court because they're afraid of being put in jail. And so when you put charges or you put probation on an individual, there's all of these different mental aspects and health aspects that impact them. What I would do.
Alrighty. Now, DA Hayden, you have 30 seconds to respond to anything that the counselor has said, if you'd like.
Sure. I would just simply say we're not talking about coerced rehabilitation here. Services over sentence is entirely voluntary. But if someone is arraigned on a charge and also has substance abuse or mental health issues and wants to avail themselves of the services over sentences, that's our option. It's not a matter of coercion. It's just a matter of providing that treatment alternative to everyone that comes into our system as a touch point, whether they're arraigned or whether they're not. So it just.
Counselor, 30 seconds for the counselor.
Absolutely. So in practice, the way this looks in court is when you're standing next to a defendant, they'll say, would you like to go to jail or would you like to go to rehabilitation? And they'll often say, I'm going to go to rehabilitation. And it's actually a trick question because we don't have occupancy in the beds for mental health and or rehabilitation. And so what they'll do is they'll send them to the jail until one of those beds opens up. And this is what I mean about whether or not you come in with the best of intentions. In practice, it is criminalization and it's ineffective.
Okay, thank you very much for those responses. I'm going to now move on to the discussion of the decline to prosecute list of former DA Rachel Rollins. And this time I'll start with Councillor Arroyo. Councillor, as a part of your description of your campaign work, you have said that you're committed to ensuring the continuation of DA Rollins's do not charge list. And so if you don't mind, I'd love to have you explain precisely what you mean when you say that you're committed to ensuring the continuation of that list.
Absolutely. So I was part of the process of creating this list, and Rachel Rollins implemented it. It's a list of 15 nonviolent charges that have a rebuttable presumption of not being charged. And in practice, it was written down as a policy, as memorandum, as something to be followed in the 9 district municipal courts, where the DA, as DA, I don't get to be in there every day. And so the written policy ensures that we actually have something to be held to, that there's something to be accountable to, and that we can do this. Here's what we got for that. 64% of folks who weren't charged never came back with a misdemeanor. 74% within a 10-year span never came back with a felony. And what it allowed us to do was rededicate unsolved homicides, things like the Integrity Review Bureau, dealing with exonerations. It allows us to free up resources to focus on violent crimes, on the most impactful crime, while also decreasing and reducing crime on the front end, because when you disengage people from the system for crimes of poverty, it actually ends up having a better effect on our communities.
And I believe you have also said that you would seek to add further offenses to that list potentially. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Absolutely. And so in other, it has been so successful that even though here it is no longer being followed by the current DA, in other municipalities, they've actually added separate and different offenses to that to ensure that other crimes of poverty, things that are generally related to poverty, things that are related to funds, that those kinds of crimes are not prosecuted. And so what I would do is that study that I cited actually cited a number of different charges that could be added to this list. What I would do is look at the practice of that, look at the data on that, see how many of these charges are coming in to our district courts and what we're doing with them currently, and then move accordingly.
All right. So DA Hayden, as I understand it, on your side, you've said that you would not, in fact, use that same decline to prosecute list, but that rather you would take things on a case-by-case basis and look for alternatives to prosecution. What does it mean to take things on a case-by-case basis as opposed to using the structure where there's a rebuttable presumption against prosecution?
Sure. So it's not just taking cases on a case-by-case basis. It's also taking cases on a case-by-case basis with a focus on the human being and the person involved in the case, as opposed to the charges. So we stand behind and will continue to look for alternatives to prosecutions for lower level and nonviolent offenses. The same 15 cases that are looked at by now U.S. Attorney Rollins, which is with the same 15 charges that were also looked at by Dan Conley, and as Consular Royal has pointed out, and we are looking to that as well, and already do consider even cases beyond that list of 15. But our focus is on the individual that is involved in the case, not a formulaic approach based on the charges and how many of which charges we're going to prosecute and not prosecute. The data.
So I want to understand what this case by case and focusing on the individual approach means, and I want to understand what it means in terms of allocation of resources. So my understanding is that one of the points of the decline to prosecute list is that it permits a reallocation of resources, investigative and otherwise, to more violent crimes, for example, targeting homicide and violent forms of assault. And so when I hear what you're describing, I hear a sort of just a broad spread of resources across all kinds of cases. So my question is, am I understanding that correctly, that you would be reallocating resources more broadly across the full spectrum of offenses, or are you in some other fashion seeking to preserve a focus on the most violent offenses? Oh, sorry, we've lost your sound for some reason.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah. No, we absolutely will continue the focus and allocation of resources on the most violent offenses, as well as integrity review board and all the good things that are being done to make sure that we are prosecuting in a fair and equitable way. I've actually seen, since I've been there in the short amount of time I've been there, seen so far no real correlation between how we handle our district court cases, whether it's not prosecuting them or alternatives to prosecution, and our ability to handle all those other aspects of our office, which we absolutely can and will continue to do. The focus on the case-by-case basis involving the individual in the case is so that we can also make sure that we are addressing whatever situation is driving them into the system in the first place. The statistics that Councilor Roy had mentioned, they're not there. It hasn't been 10 years. It was only 3 years. And we don't even know what the result, I'm there now. So.
All right, so Councilor, you're welcome to take 30 seconds to respond to any of the DA's points.
I'm gonna need more than 30 seconds for what I just heard, but basically the study went back 10 years because under Dan Conley, 60% of those cases were dismissed. Under Rachel Rollins, 74% of those cases were dismissed. I wish that District Attorney Hayden would familiarize himself with the policies he's decided not to continue. On top of that, when you talk about a decision being made about resources, when you have lower level cases clogging up the pipeline, which is what these are, you are then forced to hire new attorneys to focus on those lower level cases rather than being able to redirect resources to those violent crimes. There's much more, but that's all I got time.
All right, and DA, you have 30 seconds to respond to the counselor.
Sorry, I was muted again. I'm not sure why it keeps muting. Now, if you don't solve the problem through the alternatives to prosecution by helping and making sure that the individuals, again, case by case basis, individuals do not come back, you are not unclogging the system. When you null process a shoplifter 12 times in a year because he shoplifts every single month, you haven't unclogged the system one bit, and you haven't helped that person. So what we need to do is make sure we actually are unclogging the system by giving that person an alternative to prosecution that prevents them from reoffending.
Can I respond to that, or do I not get a second rebuttal?
I will let you respond, but then also the DA gets to respond again as well. All right.
That's fine.
So 30 seconds for each of you again.
Thank you very much. I just want to be clear that 25% of the time people were charged because what District Attorney Kevin Haynes talking about was already done. You look at these things on a case-by-case basis, you look at these individuals by an individual basis, and then you make determinations. The rebuttable presumption allows you to still charge these things, and they were still charged at a 25% clip. The reality is, what I see when you tell me somebody's been brought before you 12 times for shoplifting is some underlying issue that needs to be addressed, but it doesn't need to be addressed through prosecution. It needs to be addressed through resources and diversion. And those resources actually have to be followed through.
And District Attorney, 30 seconds for you.
And that's precisely what I'm saying. But when your alternative is just a null prosecution, send them back out the door, it doesn't work. And as far as that's concerned, we unfortunately don't know what those statistics are. But we do know that if we give good, robust diversion alternatives so that we address the situation that brought the person into the system in the first place, that's how we keep them from reoffending. That's what really matters. That's what makes a difference. That's what will unclog the system.
All right, thank you for the exchange. I appreciate it. I'm going to change subject to another item where you have differences in your policy takes. I'm going to ask that we talk about gang databases, and this time the first question goes to you, District Attorney. As I understand it, District Attorney, you do support the continued use of gang databases. Would love to hear you explain why and what your approach would be to using gang databases.
Sure. I think as long as there are gangs, I think that the gang database and the intelligence that's from it is necessary and important. It's not just used for prosecution. It's used as a preventative measure. It's actually used as outreach for young kids in need. It's an important part of understanding the intelligence world that gangs operate in. MS-13 was eradicated in 2016 by now U.S. Attorney Rollins' office by use of gang databases across the Boston area. And no violent crime at the hands of MS-13, who, by the way, recruits young kids as early as middle school, happened for 2 years. That happened through the use of the gang intelligence database. Now, that having been said, it can't be overbroad. It can't overreach. A situation like what happened with the deportation of a young man who was on a database who probably shouldn't have been, that's not good either. The database needs to be curtailed and reformed. Uniform legislation for our gang databases across Massachusetts, I think, is a good idea. Notice an opportunity to be heard on gang databases and whether or not.
All right. So that was actually leading to my next question for you, which is that we do see lots of cases of problematic data in gang databases here in Massachusetts and around the country. So given that fact, how do we protect people's rights if a gang database is in use?
Is this still on me?
Yep, you get another minute. Yep.
Yeah, so I think there's I think that uniform legislation, and other states have done it. Uniform legislation around gang databases and the criteria under which gang databases operate, I think, is a very good idea. And if you read the reports and the data on it, it works and is successful. They have to be narrowly tailored. They can't be too broad. They can't overreach. Part of that process could be an appeals process. That is something that I think would be a good idea. So if someone is on a gang database and believes that they shouldn't be, their opportunity to go to court in sort of an in-camera type style and petition to be off that database would be certainly appropriate. There may be a notice requirement that could also be used. I'm not sure if that's actually the best idea, but it's one that's been put out there. But at the end of the day, it needs to be narrowly tailored so that we know that is actually capturing people that we know are involved in gang activity. And that's a parsing, a significant parsing down. Over 1,000.
Councillor Arroyo, you on the other side have, I believe, stated the position that you would eliminate gang databases. Can you please say why? And then also what that would mean for your further strategy for public safety?
Absolutely. And so, yes, I am for the dismantling of the gang database because it's racist and ineffective. The Federal Court of Appeals came back and said that the gang database was based on an erratic point system built on unsubstantiated inferences. It gives you points into a gang database if you are, say, a victim of crime from a gang member, if you are playing basketball, which is an actual FIO, which is our version of stop and frisk that it conducted. It's important to understand that it's not a crime fighting tool as much as it's a classification tool. And so what it does is it makes people suspects for the neighborhoods in which they live in, which is why about 90-something% of that list is Black or Latino. It's not actually building cases. What I would do is ask our Boston Police Department to instead focus on actually criminal activity. The gang database documents non-criminal activity like what you wear and who you are around. It does not document criminal activity like whether or not you're drug trafficking, involved in violent incidents, and building cases that I can actually prosecute.
And would you have tools then or work on developing alternative tools that would permit you to tackle the problem of gangs as a form of organized criminal activity and the challenges of recruitment of juveniles and so forth? How would you approach those things?
Absolutely. I don't think the gang database at all helps stop the recruitment of juveniles. It's an entirely anonymous gang database in the sense that I don't even know if I'm on it. People on this chat don't even know if they're on it. There's no way to stop the recruitment of juveniles based on a database that just goes to law enforcement. That requires resources in diversion. That requires making sure that schools are funded, making sure that we are doing the things we have to do. In terms of actually addressing gang violence or gang activity that is criminal in nature, that requires officers actually prosecuting, actually putting together cases that I can prosecute. So in other words, that doesn't mean going, as some of these FIOs show, to a laundromat and seeing who uses that laundromat, or going to a basketball court and seeing kids playing basketball and saying, well, because one of these kids we think is a gang associate and the rest of these kids are gang associates. It means actually responding to criminal needs and issues. So if there is a case that you can build on drug trafficking or on gun trafficking the same way you do for other organized crime elements, the same way you would do for hate crime and the Ku Klux Klan or the NSC or whoever else is out here doing that kind of work, there's no database here for that.
So District Attorney, you get 30 seconds to respond to anything you've heard.
Sure. I guess the only thing I would say to that is that no, the gang databases are built on criminal activity. They are based upon known cases of gang violence that are perpetrated between gangs. That is the primary and driving force of the information that is compiled and used in gang databases and known gang affiliations. Narrowly tailoring gang databases, and I think uniform legislation is the best way to do it. Narrowly tailoring.
And Counselor, you get 30 seconds to respond. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. That is actually entirely incorrect. None of that is true. The gang database doesn't actually document gang activity that is criminal in nature. That can be maybe an element, but what it does do, for instance, in the case of that unfortunate incident where a person was deported based on the gang database, what it actually does is it documents who you are around, what you're doing. It's not criminal in nature. You can have people on there who have criminal records, but that doesn't mean that they're documenting criminal activity through the gang database. There's a real disconnect there with reality into what that program does. And I would just say I've questioned BPD at the city council level on video where they have said that the gang database does not deter crime or decrease crime.
All right, again, thank you very much for that exchange. We are now going to transition to a rapid round of yes, no questions, okay? So these are not timed, and this is the remainder of the time that we have available for this policy and issues part of the conversation. So first question, and we'll start with Councilor Arroyo and then go to DA Hayden. Would you support eliminating cash bail, yes or no?
Yes.
And DA Hayden.
Yes.
And would you support any fresh attempt by a new governor to expand the wiretapping statute in the same mode as Governor Baker sought to expand the wiretapping statute? Would you, in other words, support an effort to expand the wiretapping statute? DA first this time.
Yes.
Counselor.
No.
Okay, let's see. Would you expunge cannabis offenses, Counselor?
Yes.
DA.
Yes.
Would you eliminate qualified immunity or seek to pursue elimination of qualified immunity for law enforcement? DA.
No.
Counselor.
Yes.
Would you seek to ban no-knock warrants, Counselor?
Yes.
DA.
Depends.
Okay, what's one word? I'll let you go. Would you support the Safe Communities Act, DA?
Yes.
Counselor.
Yes.
And would you accept contributions from law enforcement unions, Counselor?
No.
And DA.
Yes.
Thank you so much for a rich and robust debate and discussion of key issues in this race. I truly appreciate it. It's so important for the citizens of Boston, of Suffolk County, and for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So DA, I know you have other obligations now that you need to head to, but thank you very much for your time. Counselor, I look forward to our next 15 minutes together of a conversation that is about, you know, your vision for the office, just as we had exactly the same shape of conversation as we had with the DA. So thank you so much, DA.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. All right. So, Counselor, I shared with the DA that I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. And so I would be very grateful for your advice about how I should explain to them what the most important functions of the DA's office are.
So that's the question, right? That's the whole question?
That's the question. Yep. And we're no more timer anymore. We've got 15 minutes. We're just going to talk.
Okay, fantastic. And just thank you, Professor Allen, for your work today. So the first thing I would say is that our justice system does not work. It is broken in that it criminalizes poverty. It has racial disparities, right? It's rife with racial disparity. In 3 years, Rachel Rollins had 9 exonerations of a collective 450 years of wrongful imprisonment, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so the things that I would look at to see whether or not a criminal justice system is actually working, which I think is what you said, right? Whether it's working.
First, I just want to know how to explain to my kids what the office does. What's the basic job of a DA? What are the top 3 things the DA does?
The way I explain it is it's an office that should be seeking justice and accountability. And for me, the best version of accountability is change behavior. And so change behavior usually comes about because you're providing resources and you're meeting people's needs. At some cases, it may require incarceration, but that's not the only tool that the DA's office or any justice system should use. So I would say, I would just boil it down to justice and accountability and restoration where appropriate.
Okay. And so now we can come back to the question that you were starting to answer. So my kids are saying to me, okay, Mom, so the DA is about accountability and changing behavior. How do I know if the DA is succeeding? What pieces of information should I be trying to gather to know if the DA is succeeding?
So you should be looking at what those racial disparities in sentencing are, what those racial disparities in charging are. And what I mean by that is when somebody is given the same charges or has the same offenses but aren't charged similarly, or are receiving different outcomes based on their economic, socioeconomic class and or race. And so you should be looking at those disparities and you should be seeing whether that's happening. Recidivism is an incredibly important thing. So if you are looking at whether or not these policies work, for instance, we spoke about the list of 15. Well, we do know it works. It's not people coming back time and time again. 64% of them never come back with a misdemeanor. 74% of them never come back with a felony. It's making sure that you're increasing the number of folks who are not coming back to the system and are instead receiving the needs that they have outside of our criminal justice system while becoming productive members of our communities.
So you also, in talking about the core functions or roles of the DA, invoked the importance of restoration and restorative approaches to justice. That is a matter of really transforming how our criminal legal system has operated. We have bits and pieces of restorative approaches, but can't say we necessarily do that comprehensively. So I'd like to talk about your theory of change. When you think about your goal for restoration, restorative justice in the criminal legal system, what are the three most important levers you think you'll have available to you to pull as DA to achieve that goal?
This is such a powerful office that sometimes I think people don't fully understand the power of being able to make a decision on what is charged and what isn't charged, and the impacts that can have on somebody's life, or what the sentence that you are seeking, or the probation amount of time that you're seeking on probation. All those decisions are left to a district attorney and a prosecutor, especially in the case where there are minimum mandatory sentences and how you are charged and things of that nature. And so the levers that we're looking at, frankly, are the levers that I have power as a district attorney to implement and use every day. How we are charging people, when we are charging people, what we are seeking when we do charge individuals. The second lever is legislative policy making and judicial sort of how you impact the field politically. I've been honored to be endorsed by Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, Mayor Wu, Ayanna Pressley, and others. And I think part of what this job really requires is a lever there. You brought up qualified immunity. I brought up mandatory minimums. That doesn't end unless we get legislative fixes to those things. So lending my voice as the top law enforcement official in Suffolk County to those causes is incredibly important, the platform and the podium. So the first one is sentencings and chargings and all the different sort of power that I have as a district attorney. The second one is the actual political organizing and working towards actual legislative fixes. And I would say the third one is the community, engaging community, making these cases. I will tell you that when I talk about these things, people say, well, aren't you worried about people saying you're soft on crime? And I think a lot of that is people not being fully informed on these issues as we should be. And that should be my responsibility as a district attorney, to get into the community and to really explain, this is why this works. This is why this doesn't. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're not doing that. And so I think the third lever is community, is creating that outcry and that support within communities to impact and effectuate these changes.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit more about each of these, just so that we fully understand them and what you're saying here. So coming back to charging for a moment, you said it's about how we're charging, when we're charging, what we're seeking with the charges. I especially don't understand the when we are charging part of that. What do you mean?
Absolutely, and I'll give you a real life story. So I was a public defender. I represented hundreds of people in districts and superior courts. One of those cases was an 18-year-old who had, and I'm going to use air quotes here, broke into his school. The school that he broke into just had the door open. He was going in there with friends. They were 17. When the police officers showed up, because they triggered a bunch of alarms, everybody scattered. He was caught, and because he was 18, he was sent to adult court. And because he was sent to adult court, he was given charges that would have led to deportation. He was here with a green card, but the charges were deportable. What they could have done, instead of giving him a charge that was deportable, was giving him a lesser included charge that would have had no impact on his immigration status at all. What I spent 1.5 years doing was working towards getting that taken care of, so that he wasn't deported as an 18-year-old back to a country he'd never known, back to a war-torn country. And that decision to charge him was made by an assistant district attorney at the front level. And for 1.5 years, I had an assistant district attorney who refused, even with a letter from the superintendent, even with his parents, even with his gym, his basketball coach, even with all of these aspects of why he shouldn't be here in support of him, wouldn't budge. That ADA got a new job in New Hampshire. New ADA came in, looked at it, said, this is ridiculous, dropped the charge to a lesser charge, and off he goes, took all of 5 minutes. And so when I say the decision to make a charge, that's what I mean. And what I'll also just say is, when you make charges, certain charges impact their long-term success. Certain charges lead to you being not eligible for federal student loans. Certain charges lead to you not being eligible for affordable housing. Certain charges lead it to being harder for you to actually achieve employment because of your quarry. Certain charges will actually, any felony charge, in some states, if you leave Massachusetts with a felony charge, if you go to a state that it's illegal to vote because you have a felony, you've lost your voting privileges. And so having an all-encompassing view about what the impact of the decisions we're making when we charge an individual and whether or not it is worth it for the justice and accountability aspect of this to charge them at a certain charge when you can go to a lesser included charge is something that I think we need to be vigilant on, something that I would train my ADAs on. And that's what I mean, that we actually have the ability to say, well, this is a larceny from a building, but why don't we just, charge it as a shoplifting, because we can do that. There's a number of different ways in which you can charge a case. There's a number of creative ways to do those things that still lead to the outcomes we would be seeking, would still lead to the accountability, but would not have all of these reciprocal things that impact people's success rates and have racial and class disparities.
Okay, thank you for answering my question. I appreciate it. Let me ask you about your second lever of change, legislative and judicial work, and you gave the example of qualified immunity. So of course, that relates to the recently passed police reform bill and the fact that that was something that was not achieved in that bill. So what makes you think you could pull it off differently?
So what I would just say is I have a history of this. On the city council, we've passed the facial recognition ban. I was a lead sponsor on that. We passed the Office for Police Accountability and Transparency. I was a lead sponsor on that. We passed the police surveillance ordinance, surveillance oversight ordinance. So we get to, starting in August, they have to report to us all of the surveillance equipment they are purchasing and using. And then we get the determination as to whether or not we're going to fund that or not. But it also ended communication on certain offenses to immigration, ICE, and or BPD to stop that prison to school deportation pipeline. So I've done this work. But what I know is often when you have people like Ayanna Pressley fighting at Congress for these things, or Elizabeth Warren and Senator Markey, or Mayor Wu saying we need to reallocate resources to address these needs, what they usually don't have is somebody in a law enforcement role standing up and saying, I agree with that. And so part of the power of this is having someone who's a validator, who is going to push for them and say, look, I'm not actually going to stand out here and stand in the way of you addressing these injustices. I'm going to jump in with you and stand on the front lines with you to address these things. And the power of this podium as a law enforcement official is incredibly large. We just watched Rachel Rollins and sometimes Andrea Harrington and sometimes Marion Ryan, but always Rachel Rollins stand up for many of these issues at the State House. And so I'm not saying that I'm going to be able to legislate it, but I do think my voice would matter. I think my support would matter.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I'm going to shift gears slightly now, and I want to talk about your own approach to leadership. As DA, you would be managing, roughly speaking, $24 million budget and 300 people. So it's a really big leadership job internally and externally. Can you share an example of a key leadership lesson that you've learned along the course of your career? So something in the experiences you've had to date, a key leadership lesson that will guide you in leading this organization well.
Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important to hire people who are aligned with your values and what you are trying to do with your mission, and then to empower them to do the work. I think part of the largest problem that I've seen is that people want to micromanage often offices that are too large to micromanage. And what you actually have to do is hire and bring in and support people within those institutions who share your vision, your goals, and your mission, and give them the tools to do their job by doing your job. And so that's the one that I would say it is to refrain from sort of micromanaging, but ensuring that I'm empowering and pushing and promoting and putting people in place that share the vision and values that I have.
So I'm going to push you on that one a little bit, because in some sense, right, I appreciate your answer. And those are things that we often all know about leading a healthy organization. But so tell us a story. How did you come to internalize the point about the challenge around micromanagement?
So it's actually something that I saw and experienced in that way. I was a district attorney, a public defender under District Attorney Blodgett. And under Blodgett, he would do uniform rules that ADAs had to follow. He essentially took away their discretion. And one of the ways in which that impacted us was under dangerousness hearings, which is when you hold somebody for being for dangerousness. And I had a woman who came in with no prior record, who had been domestically abused by her husband, but he thought she was going to go to police. And so he went to police and ended up creating a warrant for her arrest. And so she walked into court, no prior record, 3 children, all valedictorians, and they asked for a dangerousness hearing because they were told that they always had to ask for dangerousness hearings when it was a domestic violence case. And even though that ADA disagreed, even though that judge disagreed, they weren't given the leeway, even when they went back to argue with supervisors, to actually not request this. And for folks who don't know, that dangerousness hearing meant that that woman had to go to Framingham, the House of Corrections, for 48 hours before she could come back on something that they would have just let her walk out of court on. And so it had a very visible impact on her. It had a visible impact on this ADA, who was distraught that they weren't given the ability to sort of follow their values here. And I think part of that was, it was an indication of what the wrong values are in ADA, but also what happens when you don't allow people some freedom and leeway to make decisions on what they are seeing in real time.
And so when you talk about hiring people who align with your values, tell us what are the top 3 values you'll be looking for?
Absolutely. This is something I take really seriously. So as a public defender, I love that work. There's something pure about showing up into a courtroom and saying, look, I don't know what you've been charged with, but I got your back and we're going to go forward and I'm going to try and get you the resources and the things you need here. When you're a prosecutor, you have to look at justice from a bunch of different angles. And that means looking at that defendant and what does justice look like for him or her or they, looking at the prosecutor, at the victim, if there is a victim, and saying, what does justice look like here for them? Looking at the community as a whole and saying, what does justice look like for the community? And you have to understand the value of that case and make a determination on what's best on all of those things. And so for me, when I look at this job, I look at this job as not whether or not I am the best at putting people in jail, or whether or not my incarceration rates look this way, are moving on up, which is how they've looked in other district attorneys' offices. Or you can't get promoted unless you're going to trial often, which means you're often not showing the kind of discretion you should be showing. I'm looking at how are you evaluating justice in these situations, and how is that leading to reduced recidivism? How is that leading to stabilization of people's lives? How is that leading to restoration for victims in the situations in which there are victims? And that's a harder thing to quantify, but largely what it comes back to is the principle that I share and that I would like people who work for me to share, which is that people are good. And what I mean by that is when they do things that are antisocial or criminal, it is often because a need is not being met. Something is wrong. And it's our job to sort of deduce and figure out what that is. Is it a mental health issue? Is there a substance use issue here? Are there resources they're not receiving? Are they breaking into Target or whatever it is because they don't have resources and they're trying to steal toiletries? What is going on here? Which is very different than when I think DAs look at people as naturally bad, and what keeps them in line is consequences and mandatory minimums and the idea of sentences and punishment. I don't think that. And I would want people who work for me, not to think that either. I want them to look at people as human beings and as people in need and try to address it from there.
Thank you. Alrighty, thank you. Last question for you. Pivoting again, what is one of your family's favorite places in Boston to celebrate a birthday or other fun family event?
We're very family oriented. It's usually my mother's house, but when it's not my mother's house, it's the Arboretum. It's a special place for us. Certainly during the pandemic, we spent a lot of time in the Arboretum. But I think we have beautiful spots of nature in the city. It doesn't have to be the Arboretum for some folks, but for me it is. I live in Hyde Park, and so the Arboretum's right there in Rosendale, JP, and so we go there quite a bit.
Beautiful. Alrighty. Thank you to both of you for a terrific conversation. I know that we are now transitioning, and if it is okay, if I'll ask Sharon the power over all things, can we have a 5-minute break?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Carol Lasky. I'm the vice chair of the Ward 4 Democrats. I'm going to be speaking again at the very end of this evening's forum. But for now, I just want to give a big thanks to candidates Ricardo Arroyo and Kevin Hayden, and our wonderful moderator, Justice Champion Danielle Allen. And thank you all for tuning in. This is the third of 3 public forums hosted by the Ward 4 and Ward 5 Democrats this evening, with wonderful assistance from the Democratic committees of Wards 10, 17, and 18. Welcome to you all during this busy election season in Massachusetts and in Boston. Next up, after our short break, will be the race for Suffolk County Sheriff. And Danielle, we're ready when you are.
Okay, I'll just add that that Sheriff Tompkins is unable to make it tonight. He had a conflict that he just could not move. And just wanted to let you guys know that. And he sends his best wishes. We're gonna hear from another candidate for sheriff tonight, and then I'll let there be a little bit of silence, but so if anyone wants to grab a drink or anything else, we'll let there be silence until Danielle's ready to go. So thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Zamor Calixte. Have I said that close to correct? Can you help me pronounce that
Yes,
correctly?
okay, yes. Good evening. Yes, my name, it's Zamor Calix. The T is
Zamor.
silent.
Sorry, Zamor Calixte. Okay, terrific. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're delighted to have the chance to speak with you. We have 30 minutes for conversation, if I'm remembering correctly, but Sharon will correct me if I'm wrong. And we are not going to use a timer for this conversation on the whole. Unlikely to use a timer. We're going to just go ahead and have a free flowing conversation. I don't know if you had a chance to see any of the other parts of the conversation, but in the style of the sort of 15-minute interviews that I did with the two district attorney candidates. And we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to presume that the audience is seeking out your biographical details elsewhere. And so what I'd like to do now is to start by asking you for help talking to my 12-year-old and my 10-year-old. I've got two kids, and I'd like your advice for how I should explain to them what the most important functions of the sheriff are. Let's just start there.
So first, I'm gonna say good evening to Ward 4 and 5 and everyone this evening. And thank you, Professor Allen, for moderating this. I was looking forward to participating in this forum with my opponent, Sheriff Tompkins. Disappointed he's declined to attend, but I'm definitely looking forward to a robust conversation this evening about corrections. Now, when we talk about the function of the Suffolk County Sheriff, the mandate is care, custody, and control. What does that mean to me, and how do I break that down? I do have an 11-year-old daughter, and when I break that down to her, it means individuals that have been sentenced to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department or the House of Corrections for 2.5 years or less. It is my responsibility to help them come back to the community in a better place. That means dealing with whether it's mental health, substance use disorder, education, or having them more employable when they come back to the community. And so that is my mandate as the Suffolk County Sheriff.
Great. Thank you so much. So if I got that right, care, custody, and control with a special focus on reentry and making sure that when people reenter, they're on the path to an improved connection with the community. Can you then also help me tell my kids what kinds of information they should look for to know whether or not you're succeeding in the role of sheriff?
So I would say that to find out, to look to see if I'm succeeding, you'd have to look at the program. So first, when I talk about programming, I talk more about evidence-based programming. Currently, the sheriff's program has about 80 programs. So I can't take that away from them. But what's happening with those programs, we're not assessing them so we can really know what's working, and what's not working. And that's why I'm actually seeking the seat right now, so I can get in there, look at the programs to see if we even need 80 programs. We could very well need only 40 of those programs and allocate funding someplace else. And I'm looking at evidence-based programs at some of them, like California. They're currently using cognitive behavioral therapy, which is seen to be successful. And that's something I'd like to implement at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department.
All right, so that you're suggesting cognitive behavioral therapy would be something that would be a tool, a new program that would help you improve the reentry experience for the people under your custodial care?
Yes, and not only does it work for the people in our care, it also works for the employees. They're giving them coping mechanisms so they can understand, because you have some people that have been there for 20 years, 30 years that have been working there, so they can understand the direction that criminal justice is going in, and so that they can be part of this change that we so need.
All right, I would be grateful to hear more about that and to hear more about your thoughts as you think about taking the organization into the future. Say more about the change that you envision as necessary. What's the road people have to travel to get to where you want us to go?
Well, to get to the vote first, I have to run, which I'm doing, and get the votes and win the seat, and then get in there and look at some of the programming. But also some of the things that need to be done that it's not being done currently is something as simple as addressing a systemic barrier as individuals, when they're leaving our facility, making sure they have a mass ID. There are individuals that are able to leave the facility and have a stipend and can't cash it because they don't have the tools that they need. So that becomes a barrier. We are a state agency. It doesn't make sense that we have not leveraged our relationship with the Registry of Motor Vehicles so we can make sure that people have that. So if they want resources, housing, or equal employment. So that's something that needs to be worked on, that I would work on as Sheriff of Suffolk County. I would also look at, we do not have evidence-based implicit, explicit bias training in the academy right now. It's essential that we have that. We oversee people's lives 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Individuals need to be aware of their biases. Although we don't arrest, although we don't sentence, we're overseeing their day-to-day life function. So it's important that that's also implemented at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, here's what I'm hearing. All right, so I'm going to tell you what I'm hearing and ask you to correct me where I've missed it, and then I'll ask you some more questions. I'm hearing you say that the sheriff's office, as it currently functions, is interested in reentry, is working to support positive reentry, has about 80 programs to do that. But you're not convinced that those programs are effective. And you would like to get a clearer picture about effectiveness. Am I hearing you right there?
You are hearing me right. And it's not only me, it's, you can ask some of the individuals that are working in these programs because they've never been assessed. So anyone can know if they're working. They sound good, but we don't know if they're working, if individuals are returning back because they're not working or they are.
Okay, so you're painting a picture of a situation where recidivism rates are higher than we should all want them to be. So reentry is not working as well as it should be, but we don't actually, we're not steering. We can't see exactly what it is we're doing and why things aren't working. So how would you propose to fix that?
By assessing the programs, looking at see which ones are working, which not, by implementing evidence-based program that we know that's already working, that we can look at agencies that we know that have documented that their programs are working, and implementing those programs. Because the win is, and the goal is, for people to come back to the community and be able to reintegrate back into their families and the community and be successful.
So I guess what I would love to understand better, I mean, it's, believe me, reentry, nothing could be more important to me. Well, I mean, my kids in general, but reentry is among the things that's most important to me, having struggled with it directly and personally myself, and try to support my cousin's reentry. And so I think we're all trying to get to a place where we feel really good that when people have completed the service of their sanction, or if it's just been a pre-trial detention of some sort, that people are able to re-enter in ways that support healthy social connections, healthy opportunities for them, and reestablishing a healthy life. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, when you are painting a picture of the change we need, are you saying that the change we need is about the sort of the values and the kind of core goals in the sheriff's office? Or are you saying something about whether the office has, for example, the capacity around data to do evaluation? Are you talking about a change, of goal and purpose, or are you talking about a change of how the capacities of the office are organized?
Talking about implementing a research department that's looking at all the programs that we have at the Sheriff's Department, so we can know what's really working, what's helping individuals come back to the community and be successful. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Looking at curriculums, reviewing them, and the ones that are not giving the resources that are needed, replacing them with other ones.
Mm-hmm. And so I know you have deep experience in the sheriff's office, and I think you've often said in public statements that you've driven change from behind the scenes, and now you believe it's time for you to step out front. I'm wondering if you could share some of the lessons you've learned about the resources you would call on to do this work.
Some of the lessons that I have learned. I've learned a lot of lessons. I've learned through my tenure at the Sheriff's Department, I have learned that I'm extremely passionate about correction in our community. And I've learned that we need to do a better job of bridging the two. And we need to be more transparent with the community. And we need to allow people's voices to be heard. And that has not happened. Unfortunately, I was able to do some good work at the Sheriff's Department, putting together the curriculum for the choice program and creating the summer enrichment program, which hires 20 Suffolk County youth that are interested in law enforcement. But there were many things that I also presented that were not received. And I can talk about my last proposal before my resignation was the mass and cast. I did not support the current sheriff's proposal. I said to him that this is not our specialty. This is not what we do. We are trained correctional officers. That is what our mandate is. That is how our employees are trained. And not to mention, we're also, like the rest of this country, facing a staffing shortage. So my recommendation was the building that he was recommending, which is Building 8, which we at one point had a contract with ICE, and that's where undocumented immigrants were being housed. I said we should rent or lease that location to the Department of Public Health or the Department of Mental Health. Let them deliver the day-to-day wraparound services, because that is not what we're trained in. It goes back to criminalizing addiction, and it goes back to mass incarceration. That was not received. Why it was not, I don't know. But I just know that I did present that, and I was told no.
Okay.
So I just wasn't in the position to implement a lot of things. I wanted to have, I was in charge of Directions for Corrections community forums. And I had asked that we should have one to talk about housing to hold people accountable at a city, state, and federal level. Because at the time, it was probably about $48,000, $50,000 to incarcerate, just the incarceration piece. Now we're looking at $70,000. And we're not talking about what it costs for the arrest. And we're not talking about what it costs to go to the judicial process. So we're well over 6 figures now at this point. So I said, we need to have a forum. We need to hold people accountable. We're investing money in people, and people, I can't even get housing when they leave. And I was told no. I can't tell you why I was told no, but that it didn't happen.
Right.
But I didn't have the power to implement some of the things that I saw fit for the community
Right.
or for the population we serve. And that's why I've embarked on this journey. I mean, it wasn't easy for me. I've always been behind the scenes. That's my comfort zone. I'm more about executing and getting the work done, but I'm equally passionate about corrections in our community.
Okay, I really appreciate that. So if I'm hearing you right, I just want to check, make sure I'm hearing you right, so you can have an opportunity to correct me if I'm not. What I'm hearing is that you have a picture of some ways that we could shift from criminalizing strategies to health-based strategies, resource-based strategies. You'd like to see the sheriff's office shift more, and in your experience, you have found insight from community engagement to help facilitate that shift. Am I hearing you correctly?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's why I also talk about creating like an advisory board.
I was going to ask, I know you do talk a lot about community engagement and the importance of community engagement to good policy and to the success of the sheriff's office. So if you could talk more about what you imagine doing, let's just say you're elected, the election's behind you, you have the chance to rework how the sheriff's office approaches community engagement. What do you do first?
Well, what do I do first? The first thing that I do, I have to look at human resources, and I have to look at what's going on to make sure we have the staffing so we can render the adequate care that's needed at the sheriff's department. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, Channel 7 did an expose talking about the staffing shortages at the sheriff's department. Currently, the sheriff's department doesn't have a recruitment department. One is needed. So we can talk to and deal with our local universities and our schools, so we can talk about criminal justice reform and asking these young people to be part of this change and want to engage in this. And that's not happening. So I would look at that to make sure we have the staffing and the people to assess the programs and deliver the services that are needed.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. And so then coming back to the community engagement piece, and to build that part out, for that part, what's the sort of first step you might take?
I would implement an advisory board, and one that consists of someone from the Department of Mental Health, Public Health, Department of Education. We need someone from the financial district. We need someone from, we're talking about legislation, so we can talk about the money that's needed. Evidence-based program is not cheap. It's going to be expensive, but the outcome is better. And in addition to that, I want somewhat faith-based, a family member that has had someone that has been incarcerated and someone that was previously incarcerated. Everyone's voice matters in this. And until we realize and recognize that, it's not an I thing, it's a we thing. And together, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on certain things. We can find things that are working already. We can implement them. And we hear what people have to say and understand how it has affected them. And until we hear their voices and include them in our changes and our policies, I don't see how we're successful at the sheriff's department.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. So I am hearing you describe new ambitions for the office, new goals that you'd like to set for the team. And it's a big team. I think it's about 1,000 people or so ultimately, if I've got that right. And I'm also hearing you, some new training to support that and recruiting new people in. So managing an organization through change is a big job. It's a big, hard job, an important leadership job. I'm wondering if you could think about what are some of the leadership lessons that you've learned over the course of your career that you would really draw on to help you make sure you are leading well for the organization?
One of the things I've learned also, just being raised by my mother and also being a leader, is that you have to be empathetic. You have to be able to see things in different lenses. You have to be able to listen, not just hear what people are saying, but listen and take into account what they're saying and understand that everyone's journey is different and be able to respect that.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, when I was the chief of communication and external affairs, everyone in my division had a voice. I listened, we heard, we worked it out together. One of the things that I said when we were working on things together, when I walked into that room too, is I'm taking off the chief hat and we're doing this together, because if this fails, we all fail.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a community effort, and we have to continue with that. And we have to allow the community to be part of the successes at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that. I agree. I think empathy is just a fundamental value for any human organization, for sure. So can you talk more about that? And then as you think about the sort of leadership challenge that you would find in the sheriff's office, any specific, again, maybe if you don't mind thinking about a leadership challenge in the past that you faced that would help you, something that gave you the chance to increase your skills and your perspective as a leader that you would take with you into this role.
I think I've always led with letting people know knowledge is key. And sometimes when you're implementing change, it may take a little bit more work, but when you inform people and have conversations with people and present them with the knowledge instead of just implementing the change, you have people will begin to understand why you're moving in the certain direction that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that we do that. But that starts in the beginning, from training at the Sheriff's Department, to talk about the change of criminal justice to the new cadets as they come in and why we're changing. But it also means implementing it also in the training for the current officers so that they can understand the direction that we're going in. Mm-hmm. And why we're going there. Mm-hmm. And the need for, and it means talking about social justice, talking about how the system is flawed, how the system is not working, and showing the data that it's proven, it's documented. Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to give them that knowledge and that information.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to shift gears again a little bit here and move away from the leadership questions back to the questions about what the goals should be for the sheriff's office. And here I have a question that is really about the broader context in Massachusetts. So it's not necessarily exactly about Suffolk County, but it is the case. There was, some work done by WBUR investigating cases where people in custody died, or where there were other serious problems with access to healthcare and the like. And of course, the right to healthcare it's a constitutional right for prisoners in America. And I do know that in Suffolk County, there were, I believe in 2021, a sort of a higher number of deaths than in previous years. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on that. Your perspective of, do we understand, where things are going wrong? Do we understand that more broadly in Massachusetts? I think more broadly, we have sort of some underreporting across Massachusetts, not Suffolk County necessarily. So how do you think about this challenge of the right to health for inmates and what we could do to improve that so we're not seeing increases in these numbers of surprising deaths?
So first, because you say surprising, we need to go back to transparency and building a transparent sheriff's department. Mm-hmm. One that acknowledges that an incident occurred and it's being investigated. And at the very least, families in the community should be given that. There have been several times when there have been incidents at the sheriff's department. I was the person that they called, but I did not have the power to speak on certain things because, of course, some things by law you cannot speak on. But what you can do is identify the fact that a human being has lost their life.
Mhm.
Why they may have, it's under investigation. But we have to humanize everybody first and foremost and recognize that an incident did occur. We don't know why, how at the moment, but we have to do that. And so then we need to be transparent and we need to look at, is it training? I mean, there's some things I do know, but I can't speak on because there are things under litigation.
Mhm.
So, but I know that we can do a better job by preparing our officers, by implementing certain policies in our training and our day-to-day, what they're doing, but we also need the staffing to do that. And we need to acknowledge that there's a staffing problem and we need to take it seriously. And we need to do better in terms of increasing our network to get more staffing there.
Mhm. And how would you say the sheriff's office should be calling on, say, the DA's office or the mayor's office or the state government to try to work on improvements in providing health for people under your custodial care?
So providing health, I mean, we contract with other agencies and they provide the day-to-day health care for the people in our care. But when we talk about reaching out to other elected officials, I instantly go back to talking about not so more re-entry, but why do we keep having this conversation about second chances?
Mhm.
60 to 70% of that population has an education level between the 5th and 7th grade, which means to me that there's a breakdown at an age when you cannot legally drop out of school. So when people talk about not wanting their tax dollars to pay for certain things, that's unacceptable to me because they have not been provided the resource that they need because their education is so low and look where they have come. So
Mhm.
those conversations need to happen simultaneously. Second chances, and why do we keep having that conversation? And why is education so low? It's a denial of, they're not receiving the resources while they're in our community and it's documented. And for the last 16 years while I was there, the number hasn't moved.
Mhm. So if I'm hearing you right, then what you're saying is in terms of both supporting the health and well-being of people in your custodial care and their successful reentry, a key area of work is actually in the education system. So that's the specific cross-institutional collaboration that you might need or seek to call attention to would be the question of what we're doing in education.
It would be one of many. There are more. We need more mental health beds. So we need to look at that.
Mhm.
And so, but you know, last time we had a conversation, we were talking something about, there was a question posed. Oh, hello.
Oh,
I don't know what happened. I can't see you.
ooh, we can
Okay, you're
still
back.
hear
I'm
you.
sorry.
Okay, there
So
we go.
a question was posed about paying 25 cents per email.
Mhm.
And my response was, I was about the emails, but I was concerned at the fact that during COVID and while the department was closed, individuals in our care and their families were paying $6 for a virtual visit, right? $6 for a 20-minute virtual visit to see their families.
Right.
And the response that came from the co-chairs was, you know, he wouldn't mind, you know, if the state wants to take it over, people's tax dollars don't want to pay for that. That's not a response. People's tax dollars weren't paying for their education. There was resources were not received. That's why they're in our care. So the narrative needs to change and how you put that out to people and let people understand why some of these people are in our care, how the system has failed them, how a lack of resources has failed them, and not just attaching numbers to it. Because until we're serious and we have someone that advocates like that and breaks it down and lets people understand what's going on, and then the cycle is going to continue itself. Being able to talk to your family, it's an essential part of your incarceration because the act of being losing your freedoms and liberty is traumatizing.
Mhm.
And not to mention, the average stay is 11 months. So you could possibly go 11 months without speaking with your family because of funding. That's unacceptable.
Yeah. No, it's very painful for sure when people are not able to connect to family. And we all know that one of the single most important things for successful reentry is those strong connections to family and community while people are incarcerated. So it's a really important point and I appreciate your calling attention to it.
But there was
I've got
no advocacy for that. There was no reconstruction of the contract to say, if you want to charge for videos and music, give 2 free virtual visits a week. There was no advocates for COVID money for those visits. And that's not okay. We need people more than ever now to be advocates about the injustices that are happening in our country.
Right. No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I have one last substantive question for you here, and thank you for mentioning COVID. COVID was an extraordinary situation and so much vulnerability for people who were incarcerated in close quarters. As you know, we were able as a society to release people in contexts that in the past we might not have thought we could release people. So I'm curious whether or not you see any lessons learned from COVID or opportunities to rethink our approach to keeping people in custody. Any lessons learned from COVID that you would want to carry with you into this work?
Lessons learned is that if we can't release people that are low-level offenders. Yes, we can. And I know earlier you asked both the DA and the about cash bail. Would I support that? Yes. It's beyond my mandate. Would I advocate for and support it? Yes, I would.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to show that in times of crisis, what we can do, but it seems as though we're more reactive than proactive. So we need someone that's going to continue to advocate for certain things, advocate for diversionary programs, advocate for individuals, advocate for resources. Someone that's going to be loud, vocal, and proactive about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much. So as we come to the conclusion of our conversation, I'm also just going to ask you, a couple of lighter questions here. Let's just start with the question of what's one of your family's favorite places in Boston to celebrate a birthday or other special event?
Celebrate a birthday. I have to say it's my sisters and I. My parents don't live here. If we're not going to mom and dad's house in Rhode Island, my sisters and I, we're getting together. We've been to the Pearl a little bit too much. At South Bay, we're seafood junkies, so we've been to the Pearl a lot.
Nice. Okay, that's fantastic. And the last question I'll ask, I guess, this evening is just again to come back to the comment that you made where you said you've been behind the scenes for so long and you believe it's time for you to step out in front. I'll give you just sort of one last chance to share with everybody why exactly you think this is the time for you to step out in front.
So first, let me say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Ward 4 and 5 for organizing this. Thank you for moderating it and everyone listening on the Zoom. Now more than ever, we need leaders that are present, progressive, proactive, and willing to use their voices for crucial issues beyond their mandate. And the sheriff's voice has a lot of power, and I will use my voice for that power. I mean, not only will I speak on important issues, my policies will also reflect that. It's not okay anymore to say I hired more women. We need to make sure their salaries are equivalent to their predecessors and their male counterparts. And I'm telling you, I will be that sheriff that will be active, proactive. I will be vocal and support things beyond my mandate to make sure that we are addressing some of these crucial issues that are happening in this state and in this country as a whole. So I'm hoping tonight I will earn the endorsement of Wards 4 and 5 and earn the support of other individuals that are watching this evening. And if I may, I welcome everyone to please go to sandyforsheriff.com. I do have a pathway to victory, and the pathway to victory is we. And we need this change, and our community needs it now. So I thank everyone this evening for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Zamora Calix. We really appreciate your time as well. And thank you for putting yourself out there. I know it takes courage to do, so hats off to you for sure.
Thank you so much.
I now would like to pass this over to Carol Lasky to close the forum.
You should be able to unmute now, Carol.
Great. Well, wow, what an evening. This wraps up number 3 in a series of 3 very successful public forums that we've conducted during this very exciting election season in Massachusetts and in Boston. Earlier this spring, we met with candidates for all the state offices: governor, lieutenant governor, auditor, secretary of the Commonwealth, attorney general, and we will continue to collaborate on forums that are in the public interest. So please stay tuned and join us again. On behalf of the Ward 4 and 5 Democrats, we're so grateful to you, Danielle Allen, for leading these important conversations this evening. This is just the best way to inform and engage. I know I learned so much this evening, and I know you all did as well. And this is the way we ensure, looking forward, ensure accountability from our elected officials. Danielle, thank you so much. Thank you for our timer in chief, Lauren Madison. Lauren, you're the best. If anybody ever wants to, know how to do time, it's Lauren. Thank you to Jonathan Cohn, Sharon Durkin, who are the chairs of our two committees, as well as the chairs of our co-sponsors this evening. And they would be from Ward 10, Rich Giordano, Pat Flaherty, from Ward 17, Joyce Linehan, from Ward 18, Cicely Graham. Wherever you live, there's a Democratic Ward Committee that would welcome your participation. The Ward 4 and Ward 5 Dems meet on the third Tuesdays of every month. Our meetings are awesome and they're open to the public. And finally, I want to make the announcement that tonight we are exactly 10 weeks away from the primaries. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the candidates and causes that matter to you. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night.